He grew up shining shoes in a steel town in western Pennsylvania. His father worked the mills for $6,000 a year. By 12, his parents had divorced, and he was breaking into gymnasiums at night just to have somewhere to go. By 22, he'd signed the largest contract in the history of professional sports, $427,000, a Jets green Lincoln Continental, and a future nobody could have predicted. 3 days before the biggest game of his life, a heckler told him his team didn't stand a chance. 18-point underdogs. No sports writer, no odds maker in America gave them a prayer. He stood up and guaranteed a victory. 3 days later, he delivered and jogged off the field with one finger raised to the sky, a white fur coat waiting in the locker room, and a legend already forming around him like smoke. He drank with Frank Sinatra. He wore full-length mink on the sideline. He filmed a pantyhose commercial that made the entire country lose its mind. He was the coolest athlete on earth, and the most dangerous man to leave alone with a bottle, because beneath the fur coats, his body was being destroyed. 4 knee surgeries, doctors draining his joints at halftime just so he could limp back onto the field. And the drinking never stopped, during the season, after the season, morning to night, by his own admission. Decades later, on a cold Saturday night in December 2003, he sat down for a live television interview, and the whole country watched the legend collapse. His eyes were glassy, his words were slurred. His 2 daughters, 17 and 12 years old, saw it happen, and when he woke up the next morning, he could not remember a single thing he'd said. His name was Joe Namath, and the ending of his story is not the one you think, because the greatest guarantee he ever made had nothing to do with football. Number 1, the lower end of Beaver Falls. The town was called Beaver Falls, and the neighborhood was called the Lower End, a place where boys entertained themselves by forming gangs and staging rock fights on the hillsides above the Beaver River. Joe Namath was born there in 1943, the youngest of 4 brothers in a Hungarian Catholic family. His grandfather, Andras Namath, had arrived at Ellis Island on the steamer Pannonia in 1911, the family name anglicized from Namath to Namath, somewhere between the gangplank and the immigration desk. The lower end was rough, but it was also something unusual for 1950s America, genuinely integrated. Joe's best friend since childhood was an African-American kid named Linwood Alford, and the 2 of them ran those streets together without anyone thinking twice. The neighborhood didn't care about the color of your skin. It cared whether you could fight. When Joe was 12, his father confessed to adultery, and his parents divorced. The split changed him. He got wilder, harder to reach. But there was always Rose, his mother, the anchor. She worked to hold the family together, and when those 6 baseball teams came calling, it was Rose who made the decision. Her son was going to college. Joe wanted to sign with the Pittsburgh Pirates and play like his idol Roberto Clemente. But what Rose wanted, Joe did. That obedience sent him south, to Alabama, to a man named Bryant, and to a life that neither of them could have imagined. Number 2, the tower above the practice field. In Tuscaloosa, Alabama, there was a man who coached football from a metal tower above the practice field. His name was Paul Bear Bryant, and in 1961, he heard about a quarterback from western Pennsylvania with an arm like a cannon and a mouth to match. Bryant sent an assistant north to sign him. The kid's name was Joe Namath. Alabama in 1961 was a different planet from Beaver Falls. Joe arrived from an integrated neighborhood to find a campus where black students were barred from enrollment. In June of 1963, he watched Governor George Wallace stand in the doorway of Foster Auditorium and try to block 2 black students from registering. Namath, who had grown up playing ball with kids of every color, later wrote that he admired the courage of Vivian Malone and James Hood for walking through that door. But none of that mattered as much as the tower. Bear Bryant didn't invite freshmen up to his coaching tower. He didn't invite most anybody up there. But he invited Joe Namath, and that gesture told the young quarterback everything he needed to know about how Bryant saw him. The feeling was mutual. Namath would later call Bryant not only the smartest coach he ever knew, but the man who taught him the meaning of integrity. By 1964, Namath led Alabama to a national championship and a 29-4 record across 3 seasons. Bear Bryant called him the greatest athlete he ever coached. But in the 4th game of that championship season, against North Carolina State, Joe's right knee buckled, and nothing about his body would ever be the same again. Number 3. The suspension that saved him before the championship. There was a night in 1963 that almost ended everything. Joe Namath had a talent for football and a talent for trouble in roughly equal measure. During his junior year, he broke Bear Bryant's team rules. He was caught drinking and reportedly spotted playing traffic cop in an intersection, directing cars like a man who'd lost all sense of consequence. Bryant had a choice: his best player, his franchise quarterback, the most talented arm he'd ever coached, and the kid had embarrassed the program. Bryant suspended Namath for the final 2 regular season games and the Sugar Bowl. It was, by Bryant's own account, the hardest thing he ever had to do. But he said it plainly: Joe was supposed to be a leader, and leaders live by the rules. What happened next revealed something about Namath that the public rarely saw. He didn't complain, he didn't transfer, he didn't blame Bryant. He took the punishment, sat in the stands, and watched his team play without him. Years later, he would say the suspension was the right call, that Bryant was right to hold him accountable. The irony is devastating. In 1963, Bear Bryant punished Joe Namath for drinking. It was the first public warning that alcohol would be a problem in this young man's life. It would not be the last, but in that moment, the suspension also proved something: that Namath could take a hit, swallow his pride, and come back stronger. He returned for his senior season and led Alabama to the national title. The boy from the lower end had learned discipline from a man on a tower. The question was whether he'd remember it when the tower was gone. Number 4. $427,000. On January 2, 1965, one day after leading Alabama in the Orange Bowl, on a knee so damaged he could barely plant his foot, Joe Namath signed a contract that changed professional sports forever. The New York Jets of the upstart American Football League offered him $427,000 over 3 years, a Jets green Lincoln Continental convertible, and a no-cut, no-trade guarantee. It was the largest contract in team sports history. The NFL's St. Louis Cardinals had drafted him 12th overall, but Sonny Werblin, the Jets owner, a former Hollywood talent agent who understood star power the way other owners understood blocking schemes, wanted Namath for the AFL. Werblin had one rule about entertainment: you need a star. And when Joe Namath walked into a room, everyone knew he was there. The reaction was volcanic. Cleveland Browns owner Art Modell warned that contracts like Namath's could be the ruination of the game. The old guard of professional football saw the number and panicked. But the AFL saw something else entirely: legitimacy. If a kid this talented chose the AFL over the NFL, then the AFL wasn't a minor league anymore. 3 weeks after the signing, Jets team doctor James Nicholas operated on Namath's right knee for the first time. The body was already breaking down before the career had even started. The signing accelerated the merger between the AFL and NFL, announced in 1966 and completed in 1970. One contract, $427,000 and a green Lincoln, helped reshape the entire structure of professional football. But none of that mattered to Joe. He was 21 years old, he was in New York City, and he had money in his pocket for the first time in his life. The Steel Town Kid was about to become something America had never seen before. Number 5. 3 words at a banquet in Miami. On Thursday evening, January 9, 1969, Joe Namath sat at a banquet table at the Miami Springs Villas. The Miami Touchdown Club was honoring him as professional football's outstanding player of the year. The Super Bowl was 3 days away. His Jets were 18-point underdogs against the Baltimore Colts, a team many considered the greatest in NFL history. No one outside of the Jets' locker room gave them a chance. Then a Colts fan in the crowd started heckling. The exact words of what Namath said next have never been recorded. No cameras were rolling, no microphones were live. The best attributed version, confirmed by Namath himself over the decades, is simple and blunt. He told the heckler that the Jets were going to win the game. He guaranteed it. The next morning, the Miami Herald ran the headline, and the sports world caught fire. 3 days later, on January 12, 1969, in front of 75,377 people at the Orange Bowl, the New York Jets beat the Baltimore Colts 16-7. Namath completed 17 of 28 passes for 206 yards. Running back Matt Snell rushed for 121 yards and scored the game's only offensive touchdown. The Jets' defense forced 5 turnovers, including 3 interceptions of NFL MVP Earl Morrall. And when it was over, Namath jogged off the field with his index finger raised to the sky, the single most iconic image in the history of American football. Namath later said something that most people forget. He said the guarantee wasn't arrogant, it was angry. A man who believed in his team, tired of being told he was wrong. That anger changed football. It legitimized the AFL, accelerated the merger, and turned the Super Bowl from a curiosity into the biggest annual sporting event in America. 1 man, 3 words, and a finger raised to the sky. Number 6. The fur coat and the pantyhose. After the guarantee came the legend, and the legend wore a full-length white fur coat on the sideline. Broadway Joe, the nickname came from teammate Sherman Plunkett, inspired by a photo shoot on the Great White Way, became something no athlete had ever been. He wasn't just famous, he was a lifestyle. He co-owned Bachelor's 3, a nightclub on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan, where he drank with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. at the bar. He escorted Raquel Welch to the Academy Awards. He told Playboy and New York Magazine exactly how he lived and didn't apologize for a word of it. In 1974, he filmed a commercial for Beauty Mist pantyhose that stunned the country. The camera panned up a pair of smooth legs, and when it reached the face, it was Joe Namath, grinning. He later said his stomach turned when he saw it. But the ad was a sensation, and it captured something essential about Namath. He would do anything, try anything, and he didn't care what the old guard thought about it. But the Bachelor's 3 story had a darker edge. In the spring of 1969, just months after the Super Bowl, NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle told Namath he had to sell his stake in the nightclub. League investigators had spotted known gamblers and organized crime figures at the bar. On June 6, 1969, Namath held a tearful press conference and said he would retire from football rather than sell. He held out for weeks before finally capitulating, selling his interest in mid-July and returning to the Jets. Beneath the fur coats and the flashbulbs and the celebrity, Namath was a man who drank during the season, by his own admission, just about all the time. The party was real, but so was the cost, and it was already accumulating in ways no one could see. Number 7. The knees of a 70-year-old man. Every snap was a negotiation with pain. Every drop back was a gamble that the ligaments would hold for one more throw. Joe Namath had 4 knee surgeries during his playing career, 2 on each knee, torn ligaments, shredded cartilage, damaged tendons. From 1972 onward, team doctors had to drain his knees at halftime just so he could walk back onto the field. He wore a custom-built Lenox Hill brace, later known as the Namath brace, that is now in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and yet he played. In 1967, he became the first quarterback in history to throw for more than 4,000 yards in a single season, a record that stood until Dan Fouts broke it more than a decade later. In 1972, he led the NFL in passing yards and touchdowns. In 1974, he won Comeback Player of the Year, all of it on legs that could barely carry him. Asked once why he risked his ruined knees in a meaningless preseason game, Namath answered with 6 words: "It's the only way I know how to play." The courage was real, but so was the price. His knees were destroyed, and the rest of his body would follow. 2 hip replacements, a shoulder replacement, a double knee replacement at age 49. The game took everything his legs had to give, and then it took more. Number 8. A Monday night disaster in Los Angeles. After the 1976 season, the New York Jets waived Joe Namath. The team that had built its entire identity around him simply let him go, unable to trade a 33-year-old quarterback with no knees and a salary nobody wanted to absorb. On May 12, 1977, Namath signed with the Los Angeles Rams. It was supposed to be a final chapter worthy of the legend. The Rams went 10-4 that year and won the NFC West. But Namath started just 4 games. In a Monday Night Football matchup against the Chicago Bears, he threw 4 interceptions, with a 5th wiped out only by a penalty. Immobile in the pocket, unable to escape the rush, he looked like a statue waiting to be toppled. After that game, he never took another snap in the NFL. His career totals tell a story no highlight reel can capture. 1,886 completions, 27,663 yards, 173 touchdowns, and 220 interceptions. 47 more interceptions than touchdowns. He is enshrined in the Hall of Fame not because of efficiency, but because of one game, one guarantee, and the way he made an entire country believe in something. Without football, Namath tried acting. A biker film with Anne Margaret, a sitcom canceled after 4 episodes, guest spots on The Love Boat and Fantasy Island. None of it filled the void, and the thing that had always been waiting, the thing Bear Bryant had tried to warn him about back in 1963, was still there. The bottle was patient. It had all the time in the world. Number 9. The worst 12 seconds on television, December 20th, 2003. A Saturday night Jets-Patriots game at Giants Stadium. ESPN's sideline reporter Suzy Kolber approached Joe Namath for a quick interview about his beloved Jets. What happened next became the most painful 12 seconds in sports broadcasting history. Namath's eyes were glassy. His words slurred. On live television, in front of millions of viewers, he told Kolber he wanted to kiss her. He said he couldn't care less about the team struggling. The broadcast cut away, but the damage was already done. His daughters saw it. Jessica was 17. Olivia was 12. The man who had raised them as a single father after his divorce from their mother, Deborah Mays. The man who had fought for primary custody and won. Who had built his life around those 2 girls. Had just humiliated himself and them on national television. The drinking had been there all along. He'd been sober for his marriage in the late 1980s, quit partly because the pain medication for his arthritic knees mixed badly with alcohol, but after the divorce in 2000, the drinking came back harder than before. Some days he drank from morning until night. The guarantee, the fur coat, the finger raised to the sky, none of it meant anything when the man behind the legend couldn't get through a broadcast without losing control. Kolber, to her enormous credit, later called it a really good guy having a bad moment. But Namath knew it was more than a moment. It was the end of a road he'd been walking since Tuscaloosa. Bear Bryant had suspended him for drinking in 1963. 40 years later, the lesson still hadn't landed. The question was whether it ever would. Number 10. The guarantee that mattered most. The morning after the Kolber interview, Joe Namath woke up and could not remember what he'd said. Someone showed him the tape. He watched himself. The glassy eyes, the slurred words, the look on Kolber's face, and something inside him broke. In his memoir, he wrote that he saw the incident as a blessing in disguise. He had embarrassed his friends and his family, and he could not escape that feeling. He said the shame was where he found his strength to deal with the addiction. He apologized to Kolber. He entered outpatient treatment, and he made a guarantee, not to a heckling fan at a banquet in Miami, not to a stadium full of doubters, but to himself and to the 2 daughters who needed their father whole. He has not had a drink since that December night in 2003. More than 20 years sober. At age 49, he underwent a double knee replacement in a single 4-hour surgery, then 2 hip replacements, then a shoulder replacement. The body that had been destroyed by football was rebuilt piece by piece by a man who finally decided he was worth saving. He works out in the pool most mornings now, in Tequesta, Florida, where he lives quietly as a grandfather of 6. He earned his University of Alabama degree in 2007, decades after leaving early, because a promise to his mother Rose is a promise you keep. After at least 5 concussions during his career, Namath has spoken openly about brain scans that showed traumatic brain injury. He has funded research and built a neurological center in Jupiter, Florida, dedicated to helping other athletes whose brains were damaged by the game. He has not been diagnosed with CTE. That can only be confirmed after death, but he has used his name and his fame to make sure the conversation about what football does to the human brain never goes quiet. In January 1969, a 25-year-old kid in a fur coat raised his finger to the sky and guaranteed the impossible. He was right, but the guarantee that mattered, the one that took more courage than any football game ever played, came decades later, in the silence of a morning when a broken man watched the worst version of himself on a television screen and decided, once and for all, that the party was over. Joe Namath guaranteed his own life. And for more than 20 years, he has delivered. If this story moved you, consider subscribing. We tell the stories of the men behind the helmets, the real stories, not just the highlights. And if you watched Broadway Joe play, tell us in the comments. What do you remember most about watching Namath and the Jets? We'd love to hear it.